Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we are very thankful that you take the time from your busy day to join us today. This show, folks, we're going to talk about correlations. And what I mean by that is we're going to speak of and get into what is going on today with regards to what the founders of the private bank that controls our government, our money system, our lives at this point, called the Federal Reserve. What were their goals when they met secretly at Jekyll Island and formulated the Federal Reserve Act of 1913? What were their goals as to regards to the events of today? I think you're going to find this very interesting and quite disturbing, in all honesty. But first of all, I want to read a quote to you from a gentleman by the name of Herman Goebbels. I shouldn't call him a gentleman, my apologies. He was in charge of the Office of Propaganda, and I do mean that, the Office of Propaganda. And folks, if you don't believe that there's a correlation between that and what's going on today in this country, I invite you to get on the internet and go to the Department of Defense and punch in the Office of Propaganda, and you will discover that the Pentagon has an Office of Propaganda. And of course, this propaganda is met for you. This propaganda is met to keep you going down the road that they want you to go down, and to give you enough false information, deception, and half-truths and lies that you won't ask the pertinent questions, and or you'll be satisfied with the lies to where you don't ask the questions and gather truth. And after all, that is what we're after in this show, is the truth of the matters of history, of legislation, and of events that affect our lives every day. So I just want to read this quote to you and understand who this is coming from. This is coming from the Minister of Propaganda during the Nazi regime, okay? In Germany, obviously. And this is the quote: "The lie can be maintained only for such a time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequence of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its power to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension the truth becomes the greatest enemy of the state." Quite interesting of a quote. Now, let's go on with, this is 1942, Germany. Let's go on to 2008, a congressman here in the United States Congress. "The rest of the world will soon realize that the U.S. government is the biggest counterfeit machine and lie in the history of the world. The reaction will be the collapse of the dollar and hyperinflation. One day, the people will wake up to the lie and say, why are we trusting this counterfeit machine?" Congressman Ron Paul of Texas in 2008. I think it's very interesting when you see what's going on today and you compare, folks, to what happened to Germany. And I don't want to get too personal, and I wasn't sure if I was going to bring this prophetic quote up, but a family member of mine who was born in Poland, and he was 8 years old when the Germans came over the border, okay? He lived 14 kilometers from the German border. As a matter of fact, his grandfather had a shop in Germany, and every weekend, this 8-year-old, he would bicycle over to Germany from Poland, and he would help his grandfather. And anyway, long story short, this gentleman, and he is a gentleman, is in the hospital, and him and I were speaking. I went down to visit him, and him and I were speaking, and he made what I consider a very prophetic quote to me. And what he said was the following, that basically he was ready to go on to his wife, who has since passed on, and I quote, "Because I am not ready to watch another nation be bled." Folks, what he's talking about is he sees the similarities as him as a child in Poland and Germany as compared to his new nation, the United States, today. You have heard me on this show quote many a times, we are 1933 Germany, and actually upscaled that now to 1936 Germany. And when you study the history of what took place with the Weimar Republic and what took place with the international banksters and what took place with the German mark, how it came and what took place with the German people, with the propaganda, with the lies, with the control of the money system, folks, you're looking in the mirror. You're looking in the mirror. It's the same people bleeding another nation. And how do they do this? They do this through the lies that Ron Paul was speaking of, and they do this through the lies that Goebbels was speaking of in 1942. So we all learn from history. What was that quote that Churchill said? Those that don't know history are bound to repeat it. Absolutely true. Now, not to be too redundant, because we have gone over this material here on the show, and if you've watched the show, you have the understanding and the knowledge that the Federal Reserve is a private foreign bank that was put together secretly by foreign and domestic bankers, okay? And what they do, folks, is in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed. It was passed on December 23rd, 1913, while the main body of the Congress was away on the Christmas holiday. And so while the bankers were working behind the scenes, the Congress never adjourned, so it stayed open. The congressmen in the whole body went for the holiday, and the people who were working behind the scenes for the international banksters didn't create the Federal Reserve Act, but they implemented it into policy, because the Federal Reserve Act was written by these bankers privately and secretly in Jekyll Island, in Georgia, in 1911 and 1912. And these are the same people that have created all these different panics. As a matter of fact, we got into one show, the different panics that they had created all the way back to the days of Andrew Jackson. And we got into Andrew Jackson quite heavily, how, even on his grave, that he wrote on his grave, I killed the bank. And what he was talking about was the private bank. We spoke about Abraham Lincoln, his famous quote in his journal when he writes that I have the Confederate Army in my front yard and the international banksters, as he called them, in my backyard, and for the future of my country, it is the bankers I fear the most. And what he was talking about, obviously, was that he needed credit. This one thing, reason why these bankers love war is because they not only make profit on the machineries of war, the boots, the guns, the bullets, the tanks, and so forth, but they also know that nations must go into debt to finance the machinery of war, the products needed for the war. So what they do is they make money on selling of the different products, and they also, their big money maker and their big control factor is that they put these countries into debt because they issue them credit based on thin air. We've gotten into this before. We opened up our Black's Law Dictionary. We looked up the definition of money, and if you remember, folks, money did not include instruments of debt or notes. And what is a note? Again, from Black's Law Dictionary, an acknowledgement of debt. So, what is going on today? Are the very same bankers creating the crises that we have today with regards to our economy? Because, folks, you got to understand, they made trillions on the way up. And now they're making trillions on the way down because they've gotten the American people as the surety to back up the debt bonds and to back out the so-called bailout. It wasn't a bailout, it was a takeover. They give you these nice political words to make you feel good about it so you won't ask questions. Oh, we got to bail these guys out because they're too big to fall. That's just not the case at all. GM has merely shut down North American operations. They've moved their headquarters to Brazil. They've opened up new plants in Vietnam. They've opened up new plants and new mergers in China. They're just merely shutting down North American operations. Doesn't make sense to do business here anymore, folks. Your government's too big. Your government has got so many agencies on these people that they no longer can afford to do business at a competitive level. There's just, folks, OSHA and all the rest of these things and the EPA and all the rest of these things, they throw all these fines and all these mandates on companies. Folks, that cost has to get covered. Where does it get covered? In the cost of the product, which reduces your profit margin. And then you take into effect that, the outrageous taxes, again, from a belligerent government that can't control its own books. It doesn't make sense. And the big thing is, if you want to go even farther into it, folks, you're looking at a devaluing currency. So if they made $1 this year, that dollar is going to be of less value. Well, the way things are going, folks, that dollar is going to be of less value next week. Look at the price of gold and silver. Gold is up by 29% so far this year. Silver is up by 64% this year. Think of that. Now, has that ounce of gold changed? No. What has changed is the medium of exchange to purchase that gold and or silver. It's not that the price of gold has gone up. The ounce of gold is still the ounce of gold. If I took that ounce of gold and laid it right here, it'd be the same ounce of gold from 10 years ago to 10 years in the future. What's changed is how many worthless pieces of debt instrument that I need to purchase that same ounce of gold with a medium of exchange called the dollar, which we all know, if you've been watching this show, is not a dollar. A dollar has 25.8 grains of gold backing it and a 15-to-1 ratio of silver. We read that verbatim to you in the Coinage Acts of the founding era of this country. But now we base our lives on an instrument of debt of a foreign bank that gives us permission to print it and then charges us an interest because they gave us permission to print it without backing anything up. It's merely an entry on a ledger made out of thin air. So what's happened? The American people have become a surety to all this debt. We spoke of, in August, monetizing debt. And if you remember watching that show, you got to think of this. If all these companies were so close to failing and so close to going under, why did the U.S. government pay the bankers 100% value of the companies and or the stock options and or the bonds? Why? Why were we forced to do that when, folks, think of it. If you had something you wish to purchase and it's a company and this company is not doing well, this company is ready to fold, are you going to pay the 100% value of that company? No, you're going to bargain with this person because you've got the person on the ropes. You're going to bargain with this person to get the best price you can to facilitate what little you can pay out. The more you pay out, the worse for you. The less you pay out, the better for you, and vice versa. But what happened with all these companies that were going under, Goldman Sachs and so forth? What happened? We paid on the 100% value. And we paid on it, folks, $28.3 trillion with no accountability. We're starting to see some accountability now. And we found some pretty startling things, haven't we? $3.3 trillion paid out to foreign banks. I'll bet you didn't know that was going on. What kind of accountability? And what's happened to the purchasing power of your medium of exchange that's in your pocket? What happened to it? The more of this worthless money they print, folks, it devalues. It takes more of pieces of them paper to buy that ounce of gold, that loaf of bread. That hasn't changed a bit. That's what's going on. That's why gold recently went up $143 in 1 week. Why? Because the medium of exchange that was used plummeted, and that medium of exchange was what you know as the dollar, which is actually a Federal Reserve note. So you've got to understand the mechanics of it. And if you've been watching this show, obviously you do, because we've gotten into the mechanics quite heavily, and we've had a lot of comments from the viewers that they've been shocked about basically how much they didn't learn in school about their own money system. how much they didn't know that how the Federal Reserve was created and what it is. Folks, the people who can, what was that famous quote by Rothschild? Amschad Rothschild? Give me control of a nation's currency, I care not who makes its laws. Why? Because if I'm controlling your currency and the credit, and I'm controlling the commerce, the political, the economic, the military policies of that entity, that country, that nation, I'm controlling it all. And this is why Lincoln had such fear about the banksters in his backyard. And this is what we have to understand is going on today. Folks, I just want to get into some economic stats with you. And first of all, these are from private industry. And I want to read these to you, and then let's go back and let's discuss what they wanted, what the desires of the founders of the Federal Reserve Act were and where we are today. Now, we keep hearing that the recovery. All right, well, we're not in a recovery. According to private analysis, this is not the U6, folks. I don't know if we went over the U6. See, the government has different, here we are, back to the lies. The government has different ways to lie to you. They can do, and they can do it just for not giving you information. They can do it through giving you half-truths. And they can do it through manipulation of formulas. And this is what they're really good at with regards to when they come out with percentages or numbers or anything like this. And let's use the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which is supposed to be a reflection, a true and accurate reflection of inflation. Now, what is inflation? We've got into inflation before. Number one, it is a hidden tax. And number two, it is because of the devaluing of a currency, that's the inflation. It takes more of them to purchase that same thing, as we used the example earlier, an ounce of gold and or a loaf of bread. So what's going on? First of all, one that jumped out at me when I was putting this together is this: according to the government, there are 43.6 million Americans now living in poverty. Folks, that was from the 2010 U.S. Census. Let me read that again. 43.6 million Americans now live in poverty. I'll tell you, folks, if you want to get startled, go on the internet and punch in Tent Cities, USA. You will be shocked at what you will see. I believe there are something like 32,000 hits for it. And as you start going through them, you will see tent cities throughout this nation. And there's no demographics to it, folks. It's not the north, the south, the east, or the west. It's not, there's no demographics to it. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And I'm not talking one or two tents. There was a tent city, I know it was down south, I believe it was Florida. Folks, I am not exaggerating when I tell you there had to be 600 tops and tents of people living in these tent communities in this country. We are being bled. We're being bled. According to Bob Chapman, this year, the American people have lost $7.7 trillion in equity in their homes. And what is he talking about? What he's talking about is, as a whole, the market value of all the residents in the United States, if you calculated their loss, $7.7 trillion. Now, do you remember we said to you a long time ago, over a year ago, that wealth does not vanish. Wealth is merely transferred. Once it's created, it's transferred. Now, think of this. The American people still have to pay, with interest, that $7.7 trillion. So the American people have lost the equity value of $7.7 trillion in their homes. They still have to pay out to the banksters that $7.7 trillion with interest. So where is the shift, folks? The shift went from the American people to the banksters. And they're the same banksters that just received $28.3 trillion in cash and credits from your pocketbook. and from your children's pocketbook. And now they're going after your pensions. You don't believe me. I know you say, no, they'll never touch our pensions. Folks, next week we're going to go over a bill that is in committee right now, and I don't want to speak about it until it gets on the floor. But they are going after your pensions. That's next. That's the last drop of the blood in the stone. It's the last drop. What else is there? They've taken your gold and silver. They've liened all your property. Your children are bonds with a birth certificate. They've devalued your currency. And if I could bring up this chart, folks, what this chart is, it's the vertical end of it is the value of the currency in 1900, and then watch what happens to the value of your currency as the Federal Reserve takes over in 1913. Now, when you look at this chart, you will see, and this chart, folks, is over a year old, you will see that, according to this chart, your purchasing power from 1913 to last year is at 4%. 4%. Is that inflation? Can you still buy a candy bar for a nickel? No. Candy bar's $1.50 now. $1.50. It's the same candy bar. Actually, I'm lying to you. It's not the same candy bar. You're getting less now. You're not getting whatever it was, say it was 12 ounces before or 2 ounces. Now you're getting that ounce and a half. You're not even getting a full candy bar, and you're still paying more for it. And folks, that chart's from last year. That if you got a modern chart today, you'd be looking at a 2% purchasing power as compared to the 100% in 1913. And there's nothing backing it up but your labors and your children's future, your folks, we can't pay this debt back. We're beyond in our obligatory debt. That means they've robbed Social Security. There's nothing but a bunch of IOUs in the Social Security fund, folks. They've robbed it. There's nothing there. They say, well, we have all these people coming on Social Security now. Well, ask yourself, what happened to all that money that all them people put in that fund for all that time? They robbed it. You've been swindled. There's nothing there. That's why it's in trouble. If you rob the bank, folks, the bank's in trouble. They don't have the cash to pay out anymore. That's the reason why. And the other big reason is, back to the lies, we were talking about formulas. I'm sorry, I digressed a little bit, but they lie to you through formulas. We were talking about the CPI, Consumer Price Index. Folks, they have changed the formula for the CPI 14 times since 1980. And how they've changed it is to correlate, to get the result they're looking for. They want to show low inflation. Last year, veterans and Social Security recipients got no COLA. And what a COLA is cost of living allowance. It's a raise. They got none because the government said there wasn't any inflation. Isn't that interesting? All the private industries in this country that really study true facts had inflation at around 8.3% in 2009. And it's going to be higher in 2010. And I'll tell you the reason why. Look what's going on with your food prices. Food prices, and this is from a person in the industry, went up 6.1% in the month of September. This is being filmed in December of 2010. Think of this. Think of this. This should outrage you. And what can we do about it is a topic for another show, but the first thing to do is to understand the problem. And you're not going to get this information from CNN or the rest of them. There are many shows like this. There are many internet outlets. There are many radio programs where you can get this information. And to a deeper degree. You know, we have a short hour to present this information to you, but what you've got to understand is the mechanics of what is going on around you. What's affecting your nation. We have seen the gas prices in the last 8 days go up 12 cents a gallon. 12 cents a gallon in the last 8 days. Now, some of the people that I pay attention to, and one of the gentlemen's name is Lindsey Williams, who says it rather well. He got through his job, he got to work with a bunch of true elite. And as he says rather well, I got to rub shoulders for 3.5 years with people who previously I did not believe existed. Now, his information is telling us that gasoline is going to be going up exponentially because the bankers are bringing us into a period of hyperinflation. And he's using the window, if you would, of about $4 a gallon by the spring coming, which would be spring of 2011. So what's going to happen to your pocketbook if that takes place? Because as we know, everything that we touch, use, or utilize is affected by the price of fuel because it has to be shipped and manufactured, obviously. What's that going to do to you? Is the government going to come out with another lie for you Social Security and veterans recipients? Of course they will. They live on the lie, as I like to say. Let's get back to some of these real statistics. Again, 43.6 million Americans now living in poverty, and that's according to the 2010 U.S. Census. Now, GM formed another company in China, and none of its profits that are being produced overseas, folks, are coming back to the United States. Okay? So you just bailed them out, with billions of dollars. They just merely shut down their North American operations and then transferred it to Vietnam, China, and their headquarters in Brazil. And they went and opened up another corporation registered in another country so they wouldn't have to pay the exorbitant taxes. Of course, there's high taxes when you're giving away $28.3 trillion to you. They left you with the burden, folks. They were like the rats getting off the Titanic as it was taking on water. And they left you with the burden. They took your money, they smiled, they didn't even give you a thank you, and they left the nation. They left the country. I'm not appalled, I'm not even surprised. This is how these people operate. 279 banks in the first 9 months of 2010 have closed. That is an incredible statistic, folks. 279 banks have been shut down since the 9th month of September. I want you to think about that. The last time we've had this kind of ratio, folks, was 1929. That is a 300% increase from the year before. And the projections, folks, for this coming year, 2011, are over 900 banks are going to fail. And let's talk about the states. What's going on with the states? Look at California. Look at New York. Look at Rhode Island. Look at Connecticut. Folks, they're in a state of disarray. They don't know what they're going to do. They really don't know what they're going to do. I'll tell you what they are doing. They are definitely preparing for a reaction from you. And how are they preparing for that? They are building an exorbitant police state. Exorbitant. What was that quote from Obama in his political campaign for president? We need a domestic security force as strong and as well-funded as our military. Why do they need that? Number one, it goes against the Posse Comitatus Act. Oh, that's right. The Patriot Act took care of that. We no longer have Posse Comitatus, which forbid the military from being used against the civilian population. So we've built this domestic security force. Almost reminds me of Hitler introducing the SS to the German people, the way they present this. And of course, it's for our own good. Do you remember we read the quote from you, verbatim, what the policing forces were in this country? Not the sheriffs, the policing forces, to protect and serve the existing political and state order. That's why they're building this domestic security force. Northcom. If you haven't heard of Northcom, type it in, Northcom. You'll be shocked to find out that President Obama requested 1 million combat-ready reserves for domestic operations here in the United States. I'm not making this up. Punch it in. You'll find it. It's everywhere. You just got to look for it. Because it's not going to come knocking on your door through the television set with CNN and the rest of them, folks. So understand this. Patriot Act, Homeland Security Acts, this was all done through a facade that we know as 9/11. Now, unless you have been a hermit in a hole, there is no more debate, or debating, I should say, as to whether 9/11 was an inside job. Everybody from people on scene to hierarchy in the military to intelligence people to architects and engineers, to witnesses, to the EMS personnel, to the footage, to the forensic evidence, all done by independent sources, because the government didn't do any. If you remember, there was never a crime scene established at 9/11. All of this proves without a shadow of a doubt that 9/11 was an inside job. There's no debating it anymore, folks. If you've watched any of our shows on 9/11, if you've done any amount of research on it, you'll understand this. And folks, don't say, oh, my government would never do this to me. History proves they will, number one, and their own legislation proves they will, number two. And what do I mean by that? Do you remember we did a show, I took what I figured, what I thought were the top 10 false flag operations in the history of the world, and it went all the way back to Rome, to Nero when he burnt Rome, blamed it on the Christians. That's how they got the people to fill the arenas and watch the Christians being eaten by tigers and lions and the rest of it. That's how they got the people to go along with it. That's how Adolf Hitler, when he burned the Reichstag in Germany, that's how he became into power. We went through that verbatim. We read it, how he created the Enabling Acts, how he was elected chancellor. Then through the crisis of burning the Reichstag, he created the Enabling Acts, created the position of Führer, and appointed himself to such position. Amazing. Folks, remember the Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution. They create a crisis or a problem to get the proper reaction from you. Oh, we have to do something about fill in the blank. And then the solution, which has already been done long, set aside and formulated long before the event, provides you with a false sense of security while it takes away your liberties and taxes your purse strings. They've learned to do it, folks, without the barrel of a gun. They follow the Hegelian dialectic. And the control of money has a lot to do with that. And let's read a quote, while we're on this, let's read a quote from John Maynard Keynes. We've all heard of Keynesian economics. He is the father of our economic system currently that the Federal Reserve is implementing and has been since 1913. But let's listen to a quote, and this is from a book that he wrote called The Economic Consequence of Peace. And I want you to listen to the words. This isn't just about purse strings. This goes much, much deeper when you control a nation's currency. Let's listen to John Maynard Keynes. And you spell his last name if you wish to look this up. Keynes. Okay, Mr. Keynes. The best way to destroy a capitalist system is to debauch the currency. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of the wealth of their citizens. There is no suppler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of a society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and does it in a manner in which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. That, my friends, is an incredible quote from the father of our economic policies that the private foreign bank uses to bleed the nations. The best way to destroy a capitalist system is to debauch the currency. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of the wealth of their citizens. There is no suppler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of a society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and does it in a manner in which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. So what's their goal here? They're looking for the best way to destroy a capitalist system, and they've discovered it to be to debauch the currency. And what takes place? What takes place is a continuing process of inflation in which the governments can confiscate secretly and observed. It's in your face. It's right there. You're feeling the results of it, but it's secretly and unobserved. Why? Because you don't have the knowledge of it. This is why this is so important to understand the mechanics and the mechanisms of our money system, what it is and what it is not. And what are they going to do? They're going to confiscate an important part of the wealth of their citizens. Their, to me, demonstrates possession. And what I mean by that is this. It's my government. I'm responsible for it. We, the people, created it. We are in a superior, inferior position to the government. Why? Because we created it. The states are in a superior position and a superior position to the federal government. Why? Because the states created it. So we're supposed to be at the top of the pecking order, if you would. It's been flipped. It's been flipped, huh? Think of this. Of their citizens. So the government is looking at you as their possession. The mindset of these people is you are their possession, their property. And also there is no suppler, no surer means than of overturning the existing basis of a society. Is this just about, controlling commerce? No. Controlling societies. Mending society to the road, to the path they wish to take you down. Because they're going to control the education. They're going to control the courts. They're going to control the money system itself. They're going to control the legislative process, the judicial process. It's amazing. All by controlling the currency. And this is why we go back to Ashmal Rothschild's quote so often. Give me control of a nation's currency. I care not who makes its laws. Folks, Ron Paul was absolutely correct when he said, if the American people are ever going to turn this around and gain control of their government, they need to gain control of their money system first. We're not going to do it. You can fight the government all you want, folks. All the government is a tool of the bankers. That's all it is. They get their marching orders through the Bilderberg Group, who gets their marching orders through the international bankers, who give their marching orders to the Council on Foreign Relations, who distribute the marching orders out to the various agencies of the government. Folks, we've gotten into this before. All we do is elect officials of an insolvent corporation. Remember, we went over the bankruptcy of 1933, March 9th, 1933. We read it verbatim to you. Read it verbatim. We read the Organic Act of 1871, which created the United States as a corporation. We went over with you in Black's Law Dictionary what the United States is, and long and behold, we discovered the United States has 3 definitions. We have the union of states that make up the United States. We have the geographical area, which makes up the United States. And then we have the corporation United States. We read this verbatim to you. So what goes on here is that this corporation is insolvent and it answers to its creditors, and that's why we use its debt instruments for a medium of exchange, and you know that organization as the Federal Reserve. Again, a private foreign bank. This is what's going on here. Okay, so there's no surer means of overturning the existing basis of a society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction. On the side of destruction. Folks, how many recessions, depressions, downturns, whatever pretty word, political word you want to put on it, have we had since 1913 when the private bank Federal Reserve took over our money system? How much war have we had? Folks, we've had more years of war than we've had of peace since 1913. The last number I read, the United States, and this was before we bombed Yemen and Syria, which we just did last month. The last number that I had in my research was the United States, since 1913, has gone to war and or bombed and or infiltrated 49 different nations in this world. We have infiltrated economically about the same through an instrument that you financed and continue to finance today through your income taxes called the International Monetary Fund. You may have heard it as the IMF. Do you remember that we read to you again verbatim the Grace Committee, which Ronald Reagan appointed to find out where all the money that was being taken in from the American people, where and how and at what proportions it was being distributed? And amazingly so, the Grace Committee found out that not 1 penny of your income taxes goes to the operations of the federal government. We read it verbatim to you. Where does it go? Folks, if you write a check to the IRS and you see who endorses the back of it, it will say Federal Reserve Banking System. Yes, that's right. The Federal Reserve, the private bankers, get your income tax money. 0 of it goes to the operations that you expect from the government. And then in turn, the Federal Reserve, through agreements, gives that money to the International Monetary Fund so they can go out and economically conquer and destroy and bleed nations. Argentina, all of the third world, and now they're in Europe, and now they're bleeding the United States, and they are building China and Asia. And the reason why they're building China and Asia is because most of their governments are dictatorships. One person, very easy to control. I don't have to worry about 535 members of Congress. Why? I can just line Kim Jong-un, the pockets, his pockets, and they're going to do whatever they want. And I just got to control one person. I don't have all these agencies of OSHA and the EPA and all the rest of them jumping on my back, fining me and telling me I can't do this and I can't do that. I don't have a bludgeoning tax system that I have to follow. I don't have a devaluing currency that's based on debt. So why shouldn't I go and do business in China, especially if the American people are going to finance my way to make the move. I'd be crazy not to go. NAFTA, GATT, CAFTA. Folks, you financed your own demise. Did you take the time to read it? Did you take the time to understand it? No. There was one guy named Ross Perot who said, folks, if NAFTA gets signed, you're going to hear a large sucking sound. And that large sucking sound will be your jobs leaving the country. That was 1992. Look where we are today. We financed our own demise, folks. We have no one to blame for the state of our country but us. Me and you. All of us as a people. Let's continue with some statistics. Oh, Blockbusters. They Blockbuster Video, you know, they rent videos. Blockbuster Video announced last week that they are shutting down 6,500 stores worldwide. Right now, the American people in the world as a whole, there is $700 trillion in derivatives that are in danger of collapsing. 700 trillion. How long do you have to run the printing press to make $700 trillion? Folks, you can't pay that back. The global GDP does not have $700 trillion for the next 20 years, for the next 50 years. How are you going to pay that back? You're not. So again, the bankers made all the money on the way up, and they're going to make all the money on the way down. Now, are you ready for this one? 42% of the federal budget. I want you to guess where it goes. You're probably thinking, oh, let me see. Department of Defense, the welfare agencies, maybe for the roads and highways. Yeah, we probably wouldn't think that because the roads and highways are an absolute mess. 42% of the federal budget, folks, goes to the interest payments to the international bankers because they give us permission to print our medium of exchange that you know is the dollar. 42% goes to the bankers to cover interest payments because they give us permission through the entrance on a ledger to print a fiat currency based on debt. 42%. There is more debt in this country, and I'm not going to get into all the numbers because for the sake of time, and I summed this up when I wrote this down. The American people are now liable through these bailouts, obligatory debt, both personal and governmental. And folks, you know, while I've been researching debt, let me say something about this. The American people have actually been doing very, very well in trimming their debt. I'm happy for numerous reasons, but the two that stick up in my head is that, okay, they're getting themselves out from under the cloth of the bankers, but number two, my God, their eyes are opening up. They're seeing what's in front of them and around them, and they're acting on it. What is the government doing? Are they acting on this? No. They're raising their funds. I mean, their taxes and their budgets. There's no budget cuts. What was it last year? We went up by. They requested so far for the budget this year an increase of $1.131 trillion in their budget request. Now, of course, they know some of that's pork and fat. Some of that is just to say, okay, we'll give up this, but you're going to give us that. So the American people have taken their savings rate in the year 2010 from a 0.35 percentile to almost a 5 percentile, 5.0. That's fantastic. That excites me. And it should excite you too, because we're trying to get out of the cloth of the bankers. But back to the liability of debt for the American people, when you take the obligatory debt of Social Security and Medicare and all these other agencies that have been robbed by the trustees called the Congress, and when you take all the obligatory debt of foreign aid, and you take all the obligatory debt of things like the Treasury bonds and all this, folks, not to get into a lot of numbers, but the American people have more debt than the entire world combined. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? We have gone from the most prosperous, credit-worthy country in the history of the entire world, and now as a nation, we are the most heavily indebted. And I'm going to tell you the reason why. Ignorance and apathy. Because you did nothing, you know nothing. And because you know nothing, you did nothing. And we have no one to blame but ourselves. Folks, the American people are so ignorant of the mechanics of our money system that we bond our children on a secured paper called the birth certificate. And we did an entire show on the birth certificate. We read this stuff verbatim to you. We read how it goes to the Department of Commerce, and how the Department of Commerce, we went up the top of the pyramid, we wound up at an institution called the Bank of International Settlements. And we also went through what was the task of the Department of Commerce, financial transactions. And then we went through the record of birth, which goes to the health department, and how that's the flesh and blood you. And how the nom de guerre, the corporate entity, is created through the birth certificate. And how that is the entity that this insolvent corporation and all its agencies and or creditors, such as the IRS, is contracting with. Currently, folks, there are 41 million Americans on food stamps. 41 million Americans are on food stamps. The true unemployment rate in this country right now is 22.8%, and that's as of last week. The big crisis you're going to start hearing about now, folks, because it's all tied into these derivatives we talked about earlier, $700 trillion, is called the mortgage-backed securities. You are about to become the surety. They made all the money on the way up. Now they're going to make all the money on the way down of the mortgage-backed securities. Now, if you took all the debt, the obligatory debt that the American people, because when they say the U.S. government, folks, you got to understand you're the surety. We went over that before. Other shows, we've gotten into that, the actual language. You are the surety of all these obligations. And accordingly, this is the Federal Reserve's own figure. And I know you're going to find this hard to believe, because even myself, who's been studying these people since the 70s, since the late 70s, I found this figure startling. The per household debt of this nation is $546,000. Folks, I had a hard time believing that. So when I got this study, I actually got into the meat and potatoes of it, if you would, because I could not accept that figure. You know what, folks? The math worked. The math worked just fine. The figure was correct. So, as this person that was in the hospital said to me, he didn't want to relive his childhood to watch this nation be bled, just like the Weimar Republic in Germany. Folks, you have got to see the writing on the wall here. The next show, we're going to get into some little bit more of quotes from old day and new day with regards to the Federal Reserve and what they're doing. But before we leave, and I know we're short for time, let's read this quote by the father of our economic policy right now. And listen to these words, because I think this strikes at the heart of the matter, okay? The best way to destroy a capitalist system is to debauch the currency. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. There is no suppler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of a society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and it does it in a manner in which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. That, my friends, is a strong statement from the father of our economic roadmap, if you would, that the Federal Reserve has been following since 1913. And you wonder why we are in the position that we are in. And folks, that should tell you the entire time the game plan, the motive, and the desire and the implementation has been to bleed this nation. And we are bleeding at a profuse rate. And you, my friends, are the tourniquet. And whether that tourniquet's going to get applied or not is up to you. But we are bleeding. We all see the wound. And we all know we need to act, or the nation, as we believe in the ideals of, not only does not exist now, but there will be no remnants of it in the very, very near future. There's 4 people, economists, that I very much pay attention to when I make my own financial decisions and try to get an understanding of where we are. And I will tell you, folks, their track record has been incredibly accurate. And all 4 of them are now stating that within the very short window, one of them actually gave the year 2012, the U.S. dollar, well, the U.S. dollar doesn't exist now. What you think is the U.S. dollar, which is actually a Federal Reserve note, will no longer exist as it currently does. Think of what a society has to go through. Talk about overturning the basis of a society. Has to go through in this process. With that being said, folks, as always, we are very appreciative of your time from your busy day. And as always, we remind you that your government is your responsibility. We thank you for watching.